And to discuss this latest story from the government and other issues around the End SARS protest is the DG, Institute for Police and Security Policy Research, Dr. Charles Omole. Thank you so much for joining us and for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start with the Vice President. Of course, his apology late Friday was met with a lot of reactions online. How much impact do you think that it would have? And of course, with also reaffirming the government's intentions towards the calls and the tears of the people.
Well, I think the Vice President's statement, it's a needed step from the government. Part of the problem in Nigeria is that we've not had a responsive government for a long time. A lot of the things that NSAS is now capturing, encapsulating, are things that people in one way or the other have been, recommending to governments in the past. The problem with the police, for example, is the fact that the posture of our policing has never been the protection of the people. It has always been preservation of governments. That's the historical posture of the police. So it has never been policing by consent, where people's views, people's feelings were involved. And I think if this NSAS movement will help to bring that change, then is the right thing, is the right way to go. But this statement of the Vice President is the right thing to do. But more than statement, it's not time for them to act. And I think that's where the challenge is, because there's a major credibility gap now between the government and the people.
All right, now talking about acting, let's also get what you know about the recommendation by the presidential panel on the reform of SARS, that, of course, 37 police officers should be dismissed. If you also have been following about 113 complaints on alleged human rights violations by these erring police officers. How much more do we need to know?
Well, the challenge with that is, the panel's recommendation was a snapshot in time. After that recommendation, there were further abuses. So the victim did not end, is my point, from the timeline of the panel. So there are new victims, even up till probably, God knows when, till it was abolished. So I think there's a need for this to be done on a state-by-state level. Again, part of the demand people are making is a presidential panel, but as far as I know, based on a Supreme Court decision in 2003, only state governors can set up panels of inquiries such as that. Federal government cannot do so. What was Obasanjo was sent to put a panel, and the IBB and the others refused to go. And the Supreme Court decided that, look, federal government cannot set up a panel of that nature that crosses multiple states. The only state governors can do that. That's why you see Fayemi doing it, Lagos State government doing it, Ekiti is doing it. So it's going to be state by state. And also state by state allow you to capture more detail, I think, because you're closer to the people than federal government doing it. But I think clearly all the SARS officers that have been indicted, not just dismissed, they must face the full wrath of the law. Because there has to be a deterrence factor. One thing I know about police is that part of what entrenches impunity is the fact that there are no consequences to bad behavior. Once they know that, okay, if you try this is what's going to happen, many of them will shape up. So we have to see this through to make sure those officers are punished according to the law.
Okay, so that's where I feel there might also be a challenge. In 2019, sometime last year, the president, of course, received a special, report of findings, about erring police officers. I'm not sure if anything was done after that report was submitted to the president. He put out tweets, stating that he had received the report. And there's some other thing that I would also speak on. The governor of Rivers State, Nyesom Wike, a few days ago was also, in video, I'm sure you also saw that, saying that he did his own inquiry, submitted to the presidency. Nothing was done after that. You've stated that only states can set up those panels of inquiry, but they don't have prosecutorial powers. Only the federal government has those powers to prosecute. So where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, I think the situation is that the government really have been paying lip service to these things. That's my view. The greatest enemy of the police sometimes is the police themselves. They know the right thing to do. I mean, someone in my position, we've engaged police for many, many years. Many of the things the protesters are saying are things we have said in private. I mean, as late as 2-3 weeks ago, I was still telling the police hierarchy, this is what you need to, what is what you need to do, and they were resisting it. So people shouldn't think that these things are new. But I think what the NSAS protest needs to do, and I think I support the protest, it needs to continue. But I think more than the protest, though, we need to add a little bit of extra to it. And that is, we need to begin to articulate alternative positions for government. You see, the moment you give government a generic demand, you have given that government the capability to wriggle out of fulfilling that demand. If you tell the government jump, and the government jumps 1 meter, and you come back and say, that's not high enough. But the government can come back and say, you didn't tell us how high we should jump in the first place. So the more specific the demands are, the easier it is to hold government accountable, the more seriously the protest will be taken by government. But the moment you are just asking for generic things, NSAS is easy to understand. But when you're talking about health reform, talking about education reform, talking about even police reform, I can tell you from top of my head right now 15 different ways to reform the police. The outcome is the same, but the pathways are different. So which one are we recommending for the government to go? So we need to bring brain power, to add to the protest movement. So the protest should continue, but in parallel, there should be specific demands now being made of government that are to the level where we can hold government accountable.
From your perspective and the way you see things, do you see the government as showing off a body language that might be different from the way they acted in the past? Do you believe that there will be action taken after the panels of inquiries across the states? Do you believe that there would be something different this time?
Well, I pray so. I mean, the challenge. The challenge is that the genie is already out of the bottle. The Nigerian young and old, and I really don't want to sort of encapsulate this as more of a young versus old thing. There are good old, good old, bad old, good young, bad young. It's about good Nigerians. Yes. But the demands, they've tested the fact that this can be done. This has never been done before in this country. And government needs to understand that if they don't yield to this demand, even if this current one fizzles out, another one is going to come. Version 2, version 3, version 4 will continue until this is done. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. Even though it's been last 1 year, but the protest, they had protest, then it stops. They had another protest, then it stopped. So once it starts, it will continue until those demands are met. So government should respond to this and make sure that we have a government that reflects the wishes of the people. Nigerian government lives in their own sort of little bubble, so to speak. And this, I think, has burst the bubble. It's time for them to listen to the people. Hence, SARS is just one way to capture the need for better and good governance in Nigeria. And I think it's a brilliant thing that we're doing at this time.
And just before we let you go, would you say more needs to be done to protect protesters from being attacked? And how can we ensure that state governments take decisive actions to ensure that these protesters are freely able to protest? And then also quickly, speak on the organization of the protest so far. I see them sweeping, protest grounds. I see them, paying their own bills. There's a lot that they have been able to handle by themselves with just a little bit of cash. So just go ahead.
Well, I think the protesters clearly shouldn't be attacked. Under any circumstance. I mean, you have to understand that the authority, this is new to them. They're not used to seeing protest by Nigerians this way. They shouldn't be attacked. But also, I think, to create a balance, protesters all over the world, I've analyzed protests globally, they need to understand that there will always be infiltrators behind around every protest. There are people whose agenda is different from that of the main protesters. And therefore, the government may need to act in such circumstances. Yes. But there has to be transparency about it. The protesters, need to understand that in the long run, they should make sure that their protest doesn't make things worse for you and I. If I can't go to my work for 1 week, for 2 weeks, how do I feed my family? Even though, I support your protest. So there has to be a balance, I think,
Yes.
in allowing maybe certain vehicles to pass. It needs to be organized to that level of granularity. But in terms of the way the protest has been conducted, I give them credit for that. But like I said, they need to have some form of representation, brain power, and specific policy around it, so that government have no way to wriggle out of this particular movement.
Charles Omole, thank you for stopping by and for speaking with us. Always interesting reading your tweets, by the way.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.